Retribution Paladin is getting changed. Hey everyone, Reworks here. So I just wanted to go over the latest blue post that we've got on the substantial changes coming to Retribution Paladin in 10.0.7, which is going to be rolling out on PTR. If it's not already, then it will be very shortly. So this post kind of came as a surprise, I think, to many people that didn't expect much in the way of class changes for 10.0.7. A lot of just much smaller things overall, but Blizzard is kind of being much more aggressive in their class tunings and redesigns that they want to do for different specs and things like that. 10.0.5 brought basically an entire druid and mystery monk rework. Now 10.0.7 is going to bring a Retribution Paladin rework. Now there's no talents or anything like that that we have to look at. They haven't announced any specifics of the changes, but what I want to do in this video is take a look at just kind of their general thought and approach that they're going to be taking and kind of what they're thinking about Retribution Paladin right now. Now you may be asking, why am I doing a Ret Paladin video? Well, I've been playing a lot of Paladin lately. Decided I wanted to try and find a second tank that I wanted to play outside of Bear Druid, and I wanted to try and learn a different healer. And of all the healers that are out there, Holy Paladin's been the one that I've always struggled with the most. And so I put a challenge to myself to try and learn Holy Paladin. And then of course there's Ret and Prot, which are specs that I have enjoyed in some different forms and variations in the past. So just been having a lot of fun playing Paladin lately. It's just been a nice change from the sort of Druid fantasy. So what we're going to do is we're going to break this down and kind of go over each of the main points that they've talked about here. Of course, I've blown this up so we're not getting everything in one. That way you can see it all. Actually, let me remove Stony Tony here real quick. There we go. Now you get a little bit more vision on the screen. So they announced, of course, we're doing a substantial rework to the Ret Paladin tree in 10.0.7. Rebuilding the tree from the ground up means significant changes ahead. However, the talent tree itself will not be available in our first PTR build or builds. So initial testing on the PTR will be missing important context. So what this tells me is that they are basically deciding to blow up Ret Paladin and rebuild it again with some new thoughts and approaches to particularly the spec tree. Though I imagine there's going to be some tweaks to the class tree that have to happen to accommodate maybe this new approach. So what they wanted to do is share some of the major goals that they're doing and that they're looking at. So this is what I'm talking about when they're approaching it. We're going to start with the first one, button bloat. Ret Paladin has a fairly large number of abilities, and some of these feel unnecessary and inefficient. We're working to tone this down and have a more focused set of abilities and cooldowns. I think there is definitely some validity to this. I haven't been playing it long, but I can tell that there's just things that I feel like I'm struggling to keep up with. You know, you have your core builders in Blade of Justice, Judgment, Crusader Strike, and then Hammer of Wrath and Execute or Wings times. And then you have your two spenders, which are, you know, Templar's Verdict and Divine Storm. So just your core rotation of stuff is 6 buttons, depending on single target AoE. But then through the trees and stuff like that, just to the stuff that adds to your damage, you've got Seraphim in the Paladin tree. You have I don't remember the name of it right off the top of my head, but there's a talent that makes, you know, let's do this. Let's make a talent. Let's find out. Classes, Retribution. Let's go to their tree. Ret. So you can see you get Seraphim down here. Then you can grab Radiant Decree, which replaces Wake of Ashes with the 3 Holy Power Spender. There's Exorcism. You now have Consecration as a big part of your cooldown rotation. Let's see, there's Final Verdict, which replaces Templar's Verdict, so not really a button added in, but Final Reckoning, Divine Toll, Execution Sentence if you wanted to go that route. You know, and then you have your sort of non-damaging abilities, things like Wings, of course, but Cleanse Toxins, Kick, Bop, Blessing of Sacrifice. You know, you have all these buttons, not including, you know, Blessing of Freedom, Hammer of Wrath, Lay on Hands, you know, so not including some of the stuff that's baseline. So yeah, I can definitely see where they think that Paladin has, Ret Paladin in particular, has a lot of button bloat. Just in the damaging stuff, you can add you know, 5 or 6 different buttons total to the spec that just makes it really hard to track and prioritize everything. So yeah, I can definitely see where things just don't feel like they always click all the time. Stacking modifiers. There are currently several talents and abilities that provide stacking bonuses, which can make for a confusing and messy playstyle that deals extreme burst damage, but in return leaves your core abilities feeling unsatisfying and undertuned. I'm going to agree with this. Let's just look at, for example, Templar's Verdict. So you have Righteous Verdict, which increases the damage. You have, Inner Grace giving you the holy power, but then there's things like Final Verdict, Vanguard's Momentum, Templar's Vindication, Seraphim, of course, adding to all of that. Empyrean Legacy giving you Templar's like a double finisher, essentially. And then you have things like Spending Holy Power gives you the stacking haste buff, plus your wings, plus your Zeal giving your judgment, making your auto attacks faster. Like, yeah, there's just a lot of stuff that just kind of stacks and multiplies. Like just over here, for example, you have Blade of Wrath giving you increased damage, Expurgation giving you the crit bonus. You have Critical Strike bonus and Blade of Condemnation, generating additional holy power. And then things like Sealed Verdict, Spending Holy Power increases your Blade of Justice stuff. So it's like you can see there's just a lot of stacking modifiers. So yeah, I can see that where it makes the talent tree feel like it's like really, really powerful for things like the 1 minute Ret Paladin builds that were a thing back in BFF or Shadowlands rather. But then outside of that, you're below all the healers because you just don't do anything. So yeah, I can definitely see that. They don't want to remove all elements of burst damage, but they do want to make the burst more purposeful and deliberate, which I think is really good. A lot of the times with Ret Paladin and my experience with it is that when you just push your buttons, everything happens all at once. And then you have to wait until like wings are up, or you have to wait until like all your passive modifiers come back up off the recharge or whatever the case may be. And it just kind of just feels a little bit gross sometimes. So they want to significantly change this is the big thing. So I think they're looking at trying to make good burst profiles, which will be powerful in things like PvP, where you want to make the swaps and then hit your burst. But at the same time in PvE, there needs to be like good sustained damage profiles for things like raid, tyrannical weeks. And then you could still have like good burst for like fortified weeks in a PvE standpoint. So hopefully they can do something to make that function. Survivability. Ret Paladins have currently one of the highest death rates across all forms of content. For a plate wearing class with hybrid healing, this doesn't feel right. I will agree. I've played with Ret Paladins in Mythic Plus. I have played with as a Ret Paladin, and there are just times where it's like, okay, I didn't have Bubble, I didn't have Shield of Vengeance, I'm just dead. Like, there's literally nothing I can do. And for a class that has plate and healing, your healing doesn't feel very impactful. It probably totally can't because of PvP purposes, but there's separate tuning knobs for PvP. So there's that. But at the same time, it's like, well, I'm wearing plate armor. Like, it should be a little bit more heavily fortified in exchange for maybe like the mobility. But like a mage, and a warlock and stuff like that, those specs are significantly more durable. So just from a class, and kind of general fantasy standpoint, like it doesn't work. Now I know survivability, people read this and were like, hunters, trust me, you guys also deserve some survivability checks. But this is specifically focusing on Ret. So hunters, I agree with you, but please get out of my comments. We're looking to strengthen them through a mixture of passive bonus and improvements to active abilities and cooldowns while keeping the degree of challenge that results from being a melee-based spec. So what they're saying is that they want to give you some better options when it comes to passive damage plus some active abilities. So I imagine things like Blessing of Protection, might see some tweaks inside the trees. I imagine things like Shield of Vengeance or Divine Protection maybe end up getting split to where you can choose both to really survive challenging content and give yourself something that you can rotate, basically. I don't think I would hate that idea. But at the same time, like, you're in melee. By being close to the boss, you take the risk of being cleaved in one shot. You take the risk of having to deal with some nasty melee mechanics and stuff like that. So I kind of see where they're coming from in that regard. And I think that giving them some passive stuff whether that's more passive like avoidance or passive stamina, whatever the case may be, might be good. But then also giving them something active so they can have that on-demand defensives, to where, you know, much like hunters, you cycle through 2 and then you just have to pray that you don't get hit by any mechanics, which means you have to be very aware of your own positioning and pray that the RNG is good to you and you don't get targeted by things like marks on Primal Council or the hammers on Primal Council, for example. Maneuverability. We realize that there's an issue here and we hope to make some improvements. However, we want to set clear expectations. Ret Paladin should not expect to gain the mobility of rogues. I think honestly, all they really need to do is lower the charger cooldown from 45 to 30. You do that and I think it's fine. Maybe another duration, an extra second of duration, but I think for the most part, just lowering the cooldown makes this maneuverability of the spec feel a lot better. And then finally, utility. The changes that Dragonflight brought to Retribution have caused some conflict for players, forcing the Ret Paladin to choose between providing benefits to their group or benefiting themselves. This choice can be interesting, but due to the way this has historically worked for Paladins, it hasn't felt right in Dragonflight. So we're looking to make changes here that allow you to feel good and improve your own damage while also providing the group benefits that you're used to, and they're looking into additional utility improvements for Paladins during the 10.0.7 test cycle. So 2 things I want to point out there. Number 1, I agree. Now I'm still learning Paladin, so things like, I'm probably not using things like bop and sacrifice and stuff like that as effectively as I could, or walking a teammate instead of myself on like my prop Paladin, for example. But for Ret, it feels like everything I have to do must be focused on myself, because there's no survivability, because there's, you know, limited maneuverability to cover long distances or to do short, quick bursts of movement that allow you to avoid a mechanic. Like there's no passive movement speed increase. Like Paladins rely on speed and chance and stuff like that right now. You know, Retribution aura is a strictly personal benefit. There's no group benefit to it at all, like Devotion aura and Concentration aura and even Crusader aura does. It's the only aura that does not provide some sort of group utility. Even party utility I think would be good. So yeah, I definitely agree with the fact that, like, when you choose to benefit your group or benefit yourself, you're almost always choosing yourself when it comes to Ret Paladin. And so finding ways to be able to make Ret Paladins feel like they can be a contributing member to the group other than just being the glass cannon, I think is a very good thing. And Paladin, I think, is one of, if not the closest specs to being like true support spec. They can pump good healing if they need to as holy. They can pump good defensives and survivability as a tank. You know, sometimes decent damage as a thing, but what they really like, to me, what makes Paladin really fun to watch, and really good Paladins fun to watch, is how they can use some of their other stuff creatively to keep their group alive. So hopefully they do that. But this last sentence here is actually interesting to me because it says we're also looking into additional utility improvements for Paladins, period. Now, is that, or for Paladins, is that Retribution? Now, they didn't specify Ret, so that tells me that they're looking at something class-wide for the class come during the 10.0.7 test cycle, which to me is really interesting. Because I think a lot of people look at Paladin and think, oh, they have like the best utility in the game. I would argue right now that they don't, because Preservation Evoker exists. Evoker in general exists, and I think there's a few other specs that the utility is really coming into play quite well right now. So overall, I think that this is going to be an interesting thing to look forward to. So what are my thoughts as someone that's coming back to Paladin for the first time since really BFA? Played it a little bit towards the end of season 4 just to level it and try it out, but really kind of investing into the class for the first time. I'm really interested by this. I know there's a couple of Paladins in the Iconic community that I play with and I'm now part of the guild with, that makes for some that are very, very interested in this. You know, I'm sure there'll be many conversations in our Discord. Hell, maybe we do like a quick podcast episode if they're willing. No pressure, Steve and Brokall. But it's definitely going to be something that when they drop the first set of changes, we'll definitely be doing a video on it. I've been loving the class. It's been really a lot of fun to play. Very different from Druid in terms of how it plays across all of its specs. So just a nice, almost complete polar opposite change of pace for me. But I think that the goals that they have here, I think, are very much spot on. from my experience and kind of reading over things like the Hammer of Wrath Discord and talking to a couple of other folks about the specs, they pretty much all agree that these goals definitely feel like they're all on target. Now it's just a matter of seeing how do they implement it and then trying to give feedback as best as possible during the testing cycle. So kind of curious to see what happens with this spec. I think it's very, very interesting to keep an eye on. So but that's it for this, guys. That's just my reaction to a spec that I've been playing a lot of and very curious to learn more about, and kind of what they're looking at planning on doing with it. So until the next video, I hope you all stay safe. I hope you're enjoying yourself. If you're having fun, you keep on gaming, and we'll see you on the next video.